Good afternoon. In this criminal law video, we're going to take a quick review of actus reus and mens rea. I'm going to start with mens rea. If we look at mens rea, it is the mental element portion of the crime. That is the mental element that the statute requires the defender or offender to have in order to be found guilty of the particular crime. If we look at Louisiana, Louisiana only lists 3 degrees of culpability of three mental elements. And those mental elements are first, specific intent. Specific intent is when the circumstances indicate that the offender actively desired the prescribed criminal consequences. When we look at actively desired, we have to make a determination as to what does it mean when a person actively desires. If you remember in the classroom, we looked at the model penal code. We looked at the model penal code and we made a determination that the model penal code says that actively desired is synonymous with purposely. And purposely is when a person consciously desires the consequences of his acts. And we can use that for the purpose of helping us define what actively desires in Louisiana. It is actually, if the circumstances indicate, if you look at what happened before, after, during, and after the crime, if you can find that the defendant purposely engaged in that particular conduct, consciously engaged in that particular conduct. If you find that he had time to reflect, there was some premeditation, there was some plan, then you will find that the person actively desired. It is looking at the totality of the circumstances and determining that the person consciously wanted the desired results of his criminal consequence, of his criminal act, I should say. Then we move on to general intent. General intent basically says in the ordinary course of human experiences, the offender must have averted to prescribed criminal consequences to result that are reasonably certain to result from his act or his failure to act. This basically is the same as knowledge in reference as it's mentioned in the model penal code. And when we talk about knowledge, we talk about knowingly. Here in our statute, it says in the ordinary course of human experience, the offender must have averted to the prescribed criminal consequences as reasonably certain to result from his act or failure to act. That only means that he knew or he should have known, based upon a reasonable person, based upon ordinary human experiences, that if I engage in this conduct, that the consequences are going to be such, and therefore he would have general intent. The statute says that if you have specific intent, you have general intent. And so if you can prove specific intent, there's no need to come back and prove general intent. General intent is the lower of the two degrees of culpability. The last degree of culpability in Louisiana is negligence, or criminal negligence, I should say. Criminal negligence exists in Louisiana under 2 circumstances. If you look at the cases, the first, the statute, criminal negligence, when circumstances indicate that the offender's act was a gross deviation below the standard of care of a reasonable person, or the actions of a reasonable person. And also the cases have added the fact that it is recklessness, that is the depraved disregard for the safety of others. This is varied from the model penal code, which has separated criminal negligence and recklessness. And so when we look at these, and when you look at the actus reus, of the mens rea part of the crime, again, the prosecution has to prove each element of a crime, and the mental intent or the mental requirement for the crime has to be proven by the prosecutor. And so when you look at the exam on Wednesday, and the exam on Wednesday will only cover mens rea and actus reus. When you look at the exam on Wednesday, if there is some question about whether the person had the mens rea that was necessary to commit the crime, you address it. If it's not the real issue, if there's no question that the person specifically actively desired, that is, the person took a gun and he put it to the person to the deceased's head and he shot him in the head. There's no question about actively desired. There's no question about whether he has specific intent. And so at that particular point, what you can do is say he's charged with second-degree murder. At that point, what you do is that you say second-degree murder is to kill another human being when one has specific intent to kill or inflict great bodily harm. And And what you basically say that he has specific intent, and tell me what specific intent is. Specific intent is, and then he has specific intent because he took the type of weapon that he took and the manner in which he committed it. It showed that he consciously desired the consequences of his act, or he purposely engaged in the act, purposely engaged, which shows that he consciously desired the consequences of his act. And then you can move on. You can move on. You don't need to spend a lot of time if it's not a real issue, but you do want to address it. However, when you look at general intent again being the lower level, I don't put a lot of emphasis on general intent because when you look at the hypothetical, you're going to find that if it's a general intent crime, that you will easily be able to show it. And when you look at the mens rea requirement, just give the definition again the way that you did with the way that we did with specific intent, and just show, and just state. I'm sorry, just state that the person had the general intent to commit the crime, and give me just a basic reason, just a basic reason. There will not be that many points for a crime that is general intent crime. There'll probably be more points for a crime than a specific intent crime because it's not going to be so easily recognized. And you're going to have to be able to show that that person actually had specific intent in order to charge them with that larger degree, that higher degree of crime, I should say. Now, if we keep going, when we look at the um, mens res, again, if we look at the lesser of the three is negligent homicide. Negligent homicide, as we said, not negligent homicide, I apologize, criminal negligence. Criminal negligence, as we said, when the circumstances indicate the person's actions are gross deviation below the standard of care of a reasonable person in like circumstances. If there is a question, if there's a question and the question leads you to believe that there is criminal negligence is involved, criminal negligence is involved. Define criminal negligence and show me how criminal negligence is involved. The mens rea part of the hypothetical is not going to be that difficult. It's not going to be that much. It would probably only count for 3, 4, maybe 5 points. Or if it's specific intent, it may even count up to 10 points if specific intent is the question. Or if it's criminal negligence in relation to an omission, it probably will count a bit more. And so the mens rea is not that difficult. The main thing that I want you to make certain that you understand when you look at the mens rea, especially when you look at specific intent, is that you have to tell me how you define actively desires. Actively desires is a term of art, and it must be defined. Now let's move on to our next category that we covered, the conduct. The conduct part of it deals with the actus reus. Now the actus reus has to be a voluntary act. The actus rea is a conduct that causes the criminal consequences. It has to be a voluntary act. Even if we're dealing with omission, it has to be voluntary. It has to be voluntary. And the cases said has been overt voluntary act. When you're looking for an overt voluntary act, what you're looking for is something that is a willed movement of the muscles. Is a willed movement of the muscles. The person actually moved this muscle consciously for the purpose of engaging in this particular conduct. Now, it says it also, when we look at to determine whether there's criminal culpability, we have to look at what the crime requires. Does the crime require a touching? Does the crime require, for instance, in arson, does it require an act of setting something afire by or destroying something by fire or destroying something by explosion? In that particular instance, the conduct is going to be the setting of the fire, the placing of the explosive, or whatever the statute may say. And what you need to do is make certain that you understand that the act that's important is that act that actually results in the commission of the crime. Because we made a statement earlier, not every act within the chain of actions need to be a voluntary act, but the crime must be must be based upon a voluntary act, meaning basically that the act that's necessary for the commission of a crime must be a voluntary act. Go back to the hypothetical where we talked about the person that committed a battery on federal property. Yes, he had to be on federal property, but the voluntary act is not necessarily how he got to the federal property. The voluntary act is the commission of the crime or the commission of the battery, and thus that is the voluntary act. Uh, when we look at the voluntary act also, we want to make certain that we look at the model penal code and the examples that the model penal code give in order to determine what is not a voluntary act. Voluntary act is something, what is not a voluntary act is something that's done unconsciously, something that is not a willed movement of the body. For instance, something done under hypnosis, something done when a person is sleepwalking, something done as a result of reflex or convulsion. Those are not voluntary acts. And continuing on with the voluntary act, we moved on after we talked about voluntary act. On this past Wednesday, we looked at the failure to act. The failure to act, and I'm going to tell you now, is one of my favorite topics to test on. It's one of my favorite topics to test on. If you look at the failure to act, in order for a failure to act to manifest criminal liability, the person who failed to act must have neglected a legal duty. And in order to find a legal duty, you look to those 5 principles that I stated in class that we're going to look at in order to determine whether that's legal duty. Was there a statute? Was there a personal status relationship? And generally, a personal status relationship is a familiar or family relationship. Was there a contractual duty? Was there that the person voluntarily assumed the care of another? That the person create the peril? But in order, even when you find that legal duty, you must find that the person is capable of performing. Not only is he capable of performing, that the causation, or the cause of the harm is a person's failure to act. One thing that I want to do before I move on too far is that I want to make certain that you understand something too, that the mens rea and actus reus, they must concur. That is, X decide that he doesn't like Y. X just simply doesn't like Y. In his mind, X wants to get rid of Y. And so what X does, X plants a trap for Y. X plants a trap for Y, that Y will come out of his front door and he will step on an explosive and it will kill Y. But what happens is that Y doesn't use his front door. He uses his back door. And so Y comes out of his back door, and as Y is going around to his car, X, who is coming down goes to his car, he gets in his car, and X, who is coming down the street, hits Y when Y pulls out of his driveway illegally. And he hits Y and he kills Y. Now, did he have the mens res? Yeah, he wanted to kill Y. He planted a bomb in Y's front door. So when Y stepped out, it would explode. But the mens rea and actus reus did not concur. At the time that he hit him and he did not have the mens rea to hit him. As a matter of fact, Y was coming out of his driveway, and Y violated the law, not looking at traffic, and pulled out in front of X. And X inadvertently, not negligent, I should say, but he inadvertently hit Y and killed Y. Therefore, X is not guilty for the death of Y because there was no concurrence of the actus reus and the mens reus. Now, let's move back to omissions. When you look at omissions, make certain that you charge the person with criminal negligence. You charge the person with the criminal negligence crime. For instance, if it's a death, it's going to be negligent homicide. If it's an injury, it's going to be negligent injury. And then you need to justify and tell me how this person is criminally negligent. But you're going to tell me how he's criminally negligent by using those legal duties, and tell me how these legal duties help you to find criminal negligence. And we discussed that on Wednesday. That is because these legal duties are something that the society has accepted, and society has says that if you look at these legal duties, there are things that if you act in this way, if you admit or you fail to act, and a reasonable person would have acted in this particular manner, then your failure to act is going to result in criminal liability if you meet the other requirements of the failure to act. And thus, if you have a relationship, that personal relationship, and in that personal relationship, you act in a manner less than what a reasonable person would act. If you had a contractual relationship and you act in a manner less than what a reasonable person would act. If you place a person, if you create the payroll and you act in a manner that's less than what you would expect the reasonable person to act, you will have a failure to act and criminal homicide, negligent homicide or negligent injury. That's just a basic overview of it. Please go back through the slides, take a look at it. Again, this is what this exam will cover on Wednesday. On Monday, we're going to start on causation. We're going to look at causation. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the exams as far as general instructions and how we're going to do the exam when we take it on Wednesday. I also will have a 5-question multiple choice quiz for you that you will have to take uh, in order to get credit for this Friday's class. It will be on the twin page in the quiz and assignment section. And so go to the quiz and assignment section. It'll be available tomorrow, and it'll be available up until 2 o'clock on Saturday. And so go in and do that 5 question. If you don't do the 5 questions, it's going to be worth 10 points. Then you will not get credit for the class, and you'll miss those 10 points. Those 5 questions are going to be dealing with the substance of what we just covered. They're going to be dealing with the law on actus reus and mens rea to give you some idea of how to analyze, I guess, and what to look for and finally on this quiz that we're going to do on Wednesday. With that, you have a good weekend. Goodbye.